Hi, people. So, just a few words on the big breaking political news today from Whitehall. Rishi Sunak and Sajid Javid are out. Both men have resigned from the cabinet, and I just don't see how Boris Johnson can continue. And these aren't any ministers. We're talking about the Chancellor of the Exchequer, arguably the second most powerful man in the country, and Health Secretary. Um, And I just don't see how Boris can keep going on and on. Sources apparently have said that at least one other cabinet minister is considering their position tonight. Dominic Raab, Liz Truss, Ben Wallace have all stated their support and loyalty to the Prime Minister. I think we're seeing a lot of politics at play here. I think there are people maneuvering their position, if they're loyal to Boris. And let's say a Boris loyalist succeeds him, then they will be looking at cabinet positions. I also think ambitious people will be also considering that loyalty to Boris is a liability in itself. And I think people like Liz Truss, Priti Patel, and others who are just absolutely dogged in their support for the Prime Minister really need to consider this. Because there comes a point when every Prime Minister can't continue. As it stands, Johnson's been in office for just under 3 years. On the 24th of this month, it will be 3 years. That puts him roughly between Gordon Brown and Theresa May. Um, so another Prime Minister who's had a relatively short tenure of 3 years. Actually, in the history of the office, it's not the shortest tenure. There have been people like George Canning, who was just 119 days, Earl of Shelburne, Anthony was less. So 3 years is short, but it's not that short when you look at some of the other premierships in British history. Of course, it is short when you look at someone like Sir Robert Walpole, who was in office for over 20 years, or Lord Liverpool, 14 years, and Pitt the Younger, also 14 years. Actually, 18 years for Pitt the Younger, I believe. Um, But the way I see this is it's not about politics. It's not about, well, his colleagues are resigning, so he has to go. For me, it's about ethics. It's about credibility. And the thing about this prime minister is it's just one thing after another. It's just one thing after another. It's not just about Partygate, although I think Partygate is not as trivial as Johnson's apologists are making it out to be. It's not trivial because when people made very real sacrifices, including our head of state, when people were being fined for doing the same thing. There was one student who got fined £10,000. Um, and it turns out from the Sue Gray report, this was not a small thing. This wasn't a few drinks outside. This was apparently quite a raucous party. Drinking until 3 in the morning, at least one fight, alcohol on the walls. It sounded like a free for all. Now, I think the perception of double standards, in fact, it isn't a perception; it's a reality of double standards, is absolutely unforgivable at a time when we saw the biggest restrictions to civil liberty, basically in my lifetime and in many people's lifetimes. Um, but it's one thing after another. The Dominic Cummings affair, Johnson stuck by that and just wouldn't listen to his colleagues. This MP, Chris Pincher, one thing I will say about that, it is allegations, and I do believe in due process, but it's just one thing after another. And I think that, people will say, I'm sure people like Liz Truss and Priti Patel will say it's the wrong time, not when war's going on in Ukraine, not when Putin's threatening Europe, not when we're dealing with the cost of living crisis and a whole range of other things. But the truth is, the world will always be a turbulent place. There's never an ideal time for a transition of leadership. There's never an ideal time for that to happen outside of general elections. But there is a time when every prime minister has overstayed their welcome. And I think that is the case with Boris Johnson. I really do believe the party is over. And, those so-called rebels who voted against him a few weeks ago, there were people calling them traitors. Um, Here's the thing: we don't do personality cults in this country. No one prime minister has a right to stay in office uh, indeterminately. Okay, um, I mean, how long can Boris go on? He's lost by elections. Public trust is very low. Labour's doing better in the polls overall, and I don't think it's that people are massively enthusiastic about Starmer. It's just that I think honestly people trust Starmer more. They think he's a bit dull. They don't particularly like all of Labour's politics. But I really don't think many people trust Boris Johnson. He's a liar. Um, and I just think what Rishi Sunak said in his resignation speech, I mean, Sunak was squeaky clean. This is a guy who was a really polished character and was being tipped for number 10. And now he's saying that ethics matter in public life. I agree with that. They do. Some would say, indeed, why has Sunak not resigned earlier? Ethics do matter in public life. It's not a trivial thing, actually. So Boris loyalists, Johnson loyalists, um, let's stop personalizing as Boris. Johnson loyalists will say that I've lost my trail of thought now. They will say that this is all tabloid fodder. It doesn't matter. It's trivial. Maybe one of those things on their own would be trivial, but when it adds up and it adds up, it just looks like sleaze. Honestly, I think this has echoes of the late Major years. And I think John Major was a man with a lot more integrity than Boris Johnson. So he has to go. This isn't making us look stronger as a nation. Yes, it's not ideal for a prime minister to resign after 3 years, following a predecessor who resigned after 3 years. But if he goes now, I don't think his premiership would be remembered as a disaster. I mean, I think he's been strong on Ukraine. He gets credit for that. He delivered Brexit, and whether you think it was right or not, it was a manifesto promise. So I don't think he'll go down as a disastrous prime minister. And as for COVID, that was an exceptional situation. I think any prime minister would have found that a profound challenge. Um, but the risk that I think Boris Johnson has is he will be tied to sleaze if he just doggedly hangs on and ignores some of his most senior colleagues and ignores the public. And this arrogance that Johnson and his inner circle have, by inner circle I mean his loyalists, of well, it's just a few backbenchers, it's just a few rebels. I mean, it's arrogant because it's taking the public for granted. I think there are a lot of people in the so-called red wall seats, including here in Sunderland, who did vote for Johnson because they believed in Brexit, but now they're getting tired of the sleaze. Um, and definitely the double standards. So I just don't see how his position can be tenable. Historically, there's always been tensions between chancellors and prime ministers, but at some point, this just can't go on because you'll have a civil war within cabinet, and I just don't see how it's tenable. I would predict loosely Johnson's got probably a month left at most. I think what we're going to see now that Sunak and Javid has resigned, I think tomorrow we'll see some more ministerial resignations, and I just think it's the beginning of the end. For his own sake, I think Johnson needs to go. His premiership will not be remembered as a disaster. He's got things that he can look to. He was strong on Ukraine. Um, he got Brexit done. And the vaccine rollout is can be seen as a government success. So I wouldn't say it's been a disastrous government, but the longer he hangs on, I think the more he will damage his legacy. He needs to go because Boris Johnson's name is attached to sleaze at this point, and we don't do personality cults. No prime minister has a right to stay on forever. Um, that's how I see it. Boris Johnson needs to go. There needs to be a leadership contest. There will be people like Liz Truss, Priti Patel, Ben Wallace, Dominic Raab. They're all Johnson loyalists at the moment who will put their name in the hat. Sunak has admitted this is probably his last ministerial job. We might find a dark horse, someone like Jeremy Hunt, who is rumoured to be looking at number 10. I think for someone outside of Johnson's loyalists to look at this, to put their name in the hat, it would be very much seen as a coup. Um, but maybe we need an outsider. The thing is, Brexit's been done, so I honestly think Brexit's no longer an issue. So for someone who's associated with Remain, like Hunt, to get to that position, it shouldn't really matter because Brexit's done anyway, and no serious candidate is going to go there. They're not going to try and overturn the result to call for another referendum. So hardcore Brexiteers shouldn't worry about that because it's done. They're not going to try and overturn that. Um, But yeah, I think there should be a leadership contest, and I think Boris should go. I don't see how this can continue, and I hope whoever succeeds and lasts longer than 3 years. It's not an ideal situation, but I just don't see how his position's tenable. Let me know your thoughts. No doubt there'll be more to say on this subject as time goes on.